Pain, and you can click the three blue dots that appear in your speaker pane in the upper right corner. Just click that and then scroll down to rename, and you can rename yourself. If you cannot figure that out or it's a little too difficult to find, please feel free to go ahead and put in the chat box that you'd like to remain anonymous, and we'll go ahead and just take care of that for you. All right, and this workshop is being sponsored by the City and County of Honolulu, the Grants and Aid Program. We received a grant from them to conduct these workshops. So thank you to the City and County of Honolulu. It's also being sponsored by Samaritan Counseling Center Hawaii and NAMI Hawaii. And Samaritan Counseling Center Hawaii is an interfaith nonprofit organization on Oahu whose mission is to provide behavioral and health counseling services to those sensitive to the spiritual traditions of people and communities in Hawaii. The one big kicker with this is that Samaritan Counseling Center will accept clients regardless of their ability to pay. So if you're uninsured, you may be experiencing financial distress and cannot pay for services, they can accept you and take care of it. Also, another caveat is that it's an interfaith center, but it's also open to non-faith as well. So that's something that they provide, and they provide telehealth right now. And once things open back up, they'll offer in-person services. Okay, now I'll let Anissa step in and talk about NAMI Hawaii.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. So at NAMI Hawaii, we have a lot of free programs right now, mostly to help families and caregivers of loved ones with a mental health condition. We have family support groups. We also have a few peer support groups right now. We have Women on Wellness. And then we also have a regular connection recovery support group, both online, and you can see them on our website. And yeah, enjoy.
Thank you, Anissa. Okay, so for our speakers today, we have Debbie Zimmerman and Claire Rausch. I think their videos are off right now, but they should put them on soon, so you'll be able to see them. Debbie Zimmerman, she is an independent wellness partner. Oh, there they are. Wave. So they're here in Hawaii, so they'll be able to share their knowledge with you. But Debbie Zimmerman, she's an independent wellness partner at AMARE Global, and she raised 2 sons diagnosed with ADHD. When the pharmaceutical approach to managing her son's health conditions failed to yield satisfactory results, Debbie pursued a holistic approach, including nutritional support, stress management, and exercise. Debbie's oldest son, Andrew, is the author of the book, What Is My Mother Doing to Me? A Teenager's Guide to Recovered Health Through Biomedical Interventions. Wow. There's Debbie, and our second speaker is Claire Rausch. She is an advanced practice registered nurse, an APRN, who recently retired from the Hawaii Department of Health Community Mental Health Centers. In this capacity, she provided behavioral health clinical services and nursing administrative support. During her years of service in the Department of Health, she was involved in the planning, development, and implementation of a program to integrate primary health care into behavioral health care services. Claire received her bachelor's degree from Minnesota State University at Moncanto and her master's degree in the family nurse practitioner specialty and a postmaster's graduate certificate in mental health nursing from the University of Hawaii. She is credentialed as a family nurse practitioner and an adult psychiatric mental health clinical nurse specialist. So those are our speakers. I have no doubt that they will send you good information and you'll learn a lot today. So without further ado, I'll let them get started.
You see this? Thanks, London. Yeah. Well, we want to get everybody. Yeah. I'll just do this. Okay. There we go. So aloha, I am Debbie Zimmerman, and I'm here with my good friend Claire Rausch, and we're so glad that you came to join us today.
We got people from all over. This is wonderful.
Yeah, it really is. there's a global interest in gut health right now. And I think the content we're going to provide will be very thought-provoking to you, and hopefully will be very helpful for you as you navigate your own personal and physical and mental health.
London, you gave a Hawaii pronunciation to the city where I did my undergraduate nursing. It was, and I should have put in the bio, I should have put Mankato, Minnesota, because we have some people on from Minnesota.
So anyway, we wanted to come on first live just so you can see us in large, because pretty soon we're going to be about an inch big as we share our screen and go through our presentation.
Okay, so we'll get started. So the name of, we've entitled our presentation, Achieving Physical and Mental Wellness Through Gut Health. And as London already noted for you, this is being presented courtesy of Samaritan Counseling Center of Hawaii.
And there we are, and there's our emails too. If you want to reach out to us via email after the presentation, we'd be happy to chat with you further if we don't have time to do that during answer questions appropriately, or if you just want to have further discussion with us after the presentation.
And we'll post this, we have a slide at the end that shows the email addresses. So if you didn't get them now, you can get them later. So we set up some objectives, explore the depth of the mental health crisis in this presentation.
We also want to understand the emerging science regarding the importance of the gut microbiome.
Learn how the oral gut microbiome and leaky gut syndrome impact both the gut microbiome and systemic health.
We want to understand how the gut microbiome brain axis communication can impact your immunity, your physical health, and your mental health.
Lastly, identify therapeutic strategies that you may be really interested in use for improved gut microbiome brain health axis health.
So we have two primary sources for our presentation today. And the first fellow is Dr. Sean Talbot. Dr. Talbot is a nutritional biochemist who has a PhD from Rutgers. He has written 2 academic textbooks and documentaries. He's on television. He's a diplomat in nutrition for the International Olympic Committee. And he's really a guru for us.
And as you can see from the picture, he's also a triathlete. And we think that he is going to be in Hawaii, maybe in February of this next year.
Yeah, for Ironman.
And then another source for our presentation and kind of helped inspire us, I attended a webinar where the content that was presented in the webinar was from Dr. Gina Willett, and she is a doctor of nutrition and also a registered dietitian. The seminar was through the Institute for Natural Resources. It was an all-day seminar, but it was very informative.
So we just want to reiterate the disclaimer. Claire and I are not microbiologists. We're not gut microbiome experts. We're just people who had really interesting experiences and improved health through taking care of our gut. And this presentation provides general information regarding medical research and therapeutic options. It comes from a variety of sources which are all cited, but we have not independently verified them. The information presented in this session should not be construed as medical advice, and as always, consult your doctor before starting any new health intervention.
Well, because I'm a nurse practitioner, I say your primary care provider, because it can be a doctor or a nurse practitioner. We're both independent wellness partners for AMARE Global, which is a company offering programs and products for wellness.
Okay, so how are you going to engage in the program this morning? We are going to try and make this as interactive as possible, but we do have a lot of content to give you. But we will be providing polls, and so we really would love to hear from you and have you encourage you to participate in these polls.
And then another way that you can participate in the presentation, we're going to be monitoring the chat box. So you can make comments, you can talk about how you're feeling about the information that we're presenting. And you can also ask the chat box you can also use the chat box to ask questions during the presentation. We're not going to use the question and answer, but we'll be monitoring the chat box. So feel free to use that. So I guess we're ready to get started, Debbie.
And I think as we already saw in the beginning of this, the more you chat, the more interesting this is. So feel free to give us your feedback as we go along. It just makes it a little more two-way than a one-way presentation. So let's get started, and we're going to do a poll. Anissa, can you bring the poll up, please?
So the question is, who's in the audience? Are you a healthcare professional, or are you a non-healthcare professional who is real actively researching health information for yourself, or are you a non-healthcare professional or member of the public with interest in this topic, but modest background knowledge? Or lastly, were you dragged here by someone else? So answer the poll, and then Anissa will post the results and we can just take a look at it and comment on it. Okay, looks like maybe Anissa is going to be posting the results. We just need to get a little bit of an idea of who we're dealing with.
Look at that.
So many of you are non-professionals or members of the public, the majority, with an interest in this topic, but you want to know more. So we'll see what we can do to help you with that. Thanks, Anissa.
Yeah, I'll bet you I was dragged here by somebody else is my mom. Okay. Okay, the next poll. So Anissa, will you pull up poll number 2? So growing up, how many of you were educated in how to take care of your physical wellness? This is a real simple question, yes or no?
Then we have one more question after this before we get into some of our PowerPoint slides. Okay, it looks like Anissa is going to be putting the results up.
Oh, wow. So about half of you got some education on physical wellness and half did not. It looks like a little bit more people did not get information. That's interesting. Okay, and then the final poll for this section.
And Lisa, you can just post that question. This is another yes or no question. And it has to do with, we're asking you, when you were growing up, were you educated in mental wellness? And we want to just kind of get an idea of what you guys' background is in that regards. So we'll give you a minute to answer yes or no to that question, and then Anissa will post the results for us.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
97% out of, we have 43 participants that are on, and you're feeling that you were not educated in mental wellness, which is not unusual. Which is not unusual. I've had a lot of education in mental wellness, but I probably would have said the same thing if I hadn't gone on to a higher education.
Well, let's go. Yeah. Can I get control of the screen? Okay, I think we're stuck.
It's because you click the
Oh,
poll box.
Oh, okay. So what should we do?
I think exit out and restart your presentation.
Okay, so stop sharing? Okay, sorry about that. We'll go back and do it again. Okay. Yeah, let me move it. We'll be right with you. Okay, so we're going to go from here. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, so in the poll, we were about 50-50 of people who had some type of information about physical wellness when they were growing up. And nationally, about 7 out of 10 people get educated on physical wellness.
So the question about mental wellness, growing up, how many of you were educated on your mental health? And boy, our results of you guys reflect what they found nationally. 1 out of 10 people were educated on mental health and mental health issues.
So what are signs of good mental wellness? Well, one is that you have great focus. You can stay on task and you can focus on a project without distraction.
And then another measure, another sign is you're able to manage pressure. When the stress is on, you're able to deal with it and not fly off the handle, but you're able to manage the stress. And that also kind of figures in with the stress resilience. Afterwards, how quickly do you go back to just normal functioning?
And then that kind of ties into confidence. You know, when you're given a problem, do you feel like you can step into it or do you step away from it?
And your mental performance is also important in good mental wellness. Do you wake up some days, or do you have days where your brain is foggy? You're not thinking, you're not coming up with the answers, even though you know that stuff. And then lastly, physical performance is also a part of good mental wellness also. Kind of has to do with vigor. Do you have energy that you need during the daytime? Do you come home at the end of the day and you're exhausted? All you can do is put something in your mouth to eat and then sit down in front of the couch and just zone out because you're exhausted. So vigor or physical performance is another measure of good mental wellness.
So this is a really timely conversation right now because mental wellness is being discussed by everyone. When you go to any grocery counter, you're going to see tons of magazines talking about mental health. And the reason, part of the reason for that is the World Health Organization has identified stress as the health epidemic of the 21st century. And this was even before COVID-19.
Yeah, and also the World Health Organization, they survey, or they work with 350 billion people around the world. So yeah, they're dealing with a lot, but I would say probably it's still number one, and it's probably a bigger number one now with the COVID-19 pandemic. So the grim reality that we face today is 8,000 people die of suicide every day.
That's
every year. 8,000 people die of suicide every year.
800,000 people.
800,000 people,
Yeah.
wow. And that's over 2,000 suicides per day.
Yeah. And many young people, you know, some as young as 12 years old and are getting treatment for illicit drug and alcohol abuse. And that number in 2016 was about 24 million people.
Probably gone up since then.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have the moms after delivery, that encounter postpartum depression. These are U.S. statistics. 1 in 5 new mothers ends up with postpartum depression. Sometimes you hear them on the media because they've done something really bad.
And then this one really resonates with me because I have, you know, boys that are in their 20s. 85% of the nation's 20 million college students reported feeling overwhelmed by stress. And more than 35% of them reported feeling depressed to the point of dysfunction. And that's probably why you see colleges recruiting so many mental health counselors now. One more.
Then we also have the issue of chronic pain. And quite often, when people are dealing with chronic pain issues, chronic back pain, other joint pain, or other pain in their body, they end up with depression. And we have about 100 million Americans, which we feel like suffer from depression also.
So chronic pain is, it's a big deal. You think about 100 million Americans, that's about 1 in 3 Americans is suffering from chronic pain.
So 90% of adolescents, so even younger than the college age kids, have a depressive disorder before the age of 18.
350 million people globally are affected by depression every year.
So there's a massive need for all the things that we use to deal with feeling depressed or stressed out. And there's a bunch of them listed here. You see a bunch of antidepressants, Lexapro, Celexa, Zoloft. But then there's also these other substances that are also listed here, the Red Bull, the Starbucks, the Monster. And what the literature says is that Americans spend over $100 billion every year on these kind of things, pharmaceutical options, non-pharmaceutical options. So big industry, you guys.
People are trying to feel better. And I think one of the good news is that there is a massive shift around discussing mental wellness. I mean, when you get people like Oprah, who has fame and money and lots of friends, and she's still feeling, you know, depressed, or talking about mental illness, or Michael Phelps, you know,
who, after he won the Olympic medal in swimming, he revealed a while afterwards that he was almost ready to kill himself. He was having suicidal thoughts because he became depressed.
Yeah.
And another celebrity that resonates with us here in Hawaii is The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. And he revealed that at points in his career, he was very depressed and struggling. So one of the main things we want you to take away from this slide is the stigma of being depressed or having a mental illness is lessening in this day and age.
Yeah, and I was just participating in a NAMI online conference, and the executive director for the American Psychological Association was saying it's really important for us to write our stories because that helps other people rewrite their lives. When we share our trials, then we are helping other people live better lives through our personal experience.
Good point. So we put this slide in here because we want to help you guys look at mental wellness on a continuum. So going from one where you're not doing good, you're probably depressed, your mental state is not very good, you're struggling, all the way up to number 10, where you've got great mental wellness and you're doing great. And if you kind of go by the colors, nice colors, a lot of us would hope to be a little bit more towards the number 10 side. But what we usually find, there's some disease states listed there that might contribute to being on the lower end of the spectrum of the mental wellness continuum. Maybe some of us kind of feel like, okay, we're doing okay, we're normal. You know, we have a little bit of problem with fatigue. We have a little bit of problem with dealing with stress and tension. Sometimes we're feeling sad, but maybe we would want to be able to move a little bit farther up on the mental wellness continuum. So that's part of why we're doing this presentation. What we do find is that Dr. Sean helped us to understand this a whole lot better. He talks about the fact that marathoners or probably triathletes, they're probably up at 8 or 9, but they're always looking for that extra edge, and probably Olympian type of athletes too. And so anything that they might be able to do to help themselves go one number up, get all the way up to 10, it also, having good mental wellness also affects your physical performance and gives you that little edge.
I think the Olympic picture is really appropriate because, you know, when you get to the Olympics, all those people are in fantastic physical health. The difference between the people who are on the podium getting the medals and those who are not is probably the mental edge, you know, their ability to perform well under stress.
Right, okay, so we have a little video that Anissa is going to bring up for you to learn a little bit more about the gut microbiome. One of the things I want to remind you guys, this is a new science. is probably, when I go back in the literature, I start seeing things about 15 years ago about the gut microbiome. So Anissa, if you would start that video.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
We're actually more non-human than human. Trillions of microscopic organisms, or microbes, call the human body home. Organisms such as bacteria, viruses, fungi, and even microscopic animals live all over our body, on our skin, and even inside us. These tiny organisms make up our microbiota, and most of them, about 95%, live in our gastrointestinal tract, more commonly known as our gut. And the combination of microbes, their genes, the environment they live in, and the stuff they produce is called the human microbiome. We've actually known for a long time that the human body is teeming with microscopic organisms. Dutch scientist Antony van Leeuwenhoek observed bacteria scrapings from his mouth way back in 1683. But it's only relatively recently that we've begun to study the relationship between our microbiome and our health. And while the research is still in its infancy, the microbiome has been linked to everything from obesity, asthma, and allergies to autoimmune disorders such as rheumatoid arthritis and diabetes. The microbiome also influences how our brain functions and is linked to conditions such as depression, anxiety, and stress. These links explain why there is now an emphasis on creating or maintaining a healthy gut. And a healthy human gut consists of several thousand types of bacteria, as well as other microbes, though some types will be more common than others. The exact composition of a person's microbiota is unique, and it's constantly changing. It depends on what you eat, where you live, who you live with, what you touch, and even how you were born. Before we are born, we have very little, if any, microbes inside us. Microbes really start to colonize our bodies the moment we are born. The way we are born, either naturally or by cesarean, influences the type of microbes we first contact, and hence the type of microbes that will first colonize our bodies. Babies born naturally come into contact with microbes found in the mother's intestinal and vaginal fluids, whereas in a cesarean birth, babies tend to be colonized by microbes typically found on the skin and in hospitals. Similarly, breastfed babies will have a different microbiota profile than formula-fed babies. From the day we are born, our microbiome evolves quickly and reaches maturity during the first 2 to 5 years. After that, it stabilizes, resembling that of an adult. As adults, changes to our microbiota are likely to be small, but major shifts in composition can occur when we radically change our diet or take antibiotics, which kill bacteria. Significant life stages, such as puberty, pregnancy, and menopause, also cause large changes to our microbiome. And as we get older, our microbiome ages too, and the number of microbe species decreases. Since most microbes are in our colon, or large intestine, what we eat feeds our microbiota. And what a healthy microbiota needs are fiber-rich, complex carbohydrates. Simple sugars found in refined carbohydrates tend to be absorbed quickly and don't reach the colon for the microorganisms to feast on. But complex carbohydrates can't be digested in the small intestine and make their way into the colon, where bacteria breaks them down through fermentation, enabling us to use nutrients we couldn't otherwise. And the microbiota provides essential vitamins that we can't make ourselves, such as B vitamins. Perhaps most important of all, the microbiota helps our immune system develop, effectively training it to distinguish between good microbes and bad pathogens that cause disease. This symbiotic relationship between humans and the trillions of microscopic organisms that live on and within us has evolved over thousands of years, and we couldn't survive without the many specialized functions they provide.
We have to go. Can you put us back, Anissa?
You have to reshare your screen again.
Got it. Okay.
Hang on a minute, you guys.
Yep.
So if you're vegetarian, So if you're vegetarian, stick with that plant-based diet. If you're a regular type of diet, we'll talk some more in the slides about what's a good type of diet to be following. So why care about the gut-brain axis? Well, some of what you learned in the little video, it's an immune system primer, the gut microbiome. It works with the brain and helps the neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine. Serotonin is the happy neurotransmitter. It helps them to function. It also works in hormone regulation. There's metabolic benefits, as the video talked about, vitamins and things that we can't produce ourselves. And there is a connection to possible disease states that might impede your optimal health. Okay, so we put this slide up just to give you an idea of how the bacteria in the gut microbiome can affect the whole body, including the brain and various organs in the body. And you can end up with a number of disease states: depression, schizophrenia, obesity or diabetes, colon cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, anxiety, Parkinson's disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative disease, irritable bowel syndrome. Those are ones that are more of the gastrointestinal tract. And Debbie, do you want to share with us your story about colon cancer?
Yeah, colon cancer. So my dad was actually diagnosed with colon cancer at 46 and then again at 66. So at 36, I had to have my first colonoscopy. And at that time, I had 7 colon polyps, including 1 precancerous type. And I could tell that the gastroenterologist was very concerned. So he scheduled another colonoscopy for me 2 years later. When we went back in, I had 5 more polyps. And again, he was very concerned, and he was getting ready to diagnose me with a genetic predisposition for making colon polyps. So we went back another 2 years, I had more polyps, and then around that time, my healthcare insurer said that they were not going to be paying for any more regular colonoscopies. I had to,
have that.
yeah, I could only have them every 5 years. I couldn't have them every 2 years, even though we were finding polyps on every colonoscopy.
You got to fight them all the time. Sorry, go ahead.
And so that's a whole nother story. So anyway, around that time, I got very interested in gut health. And so I did some things to try and optimize my gut health, which we'll be talking about more later in this presentation. And 5 years later, I went back and I had 0 polyps. And in fact, it's been 3 more colonoscopies, 15 years since that time, and I haven't had a colon polyp since then. So personally, it really showed me that there are things you can do naturally to try and help yourself stay healthy and stave off disease like colon cancer.
Okay, so this brings us to another poll question. So Anissa, if you want to post that so our participants can answer, from which part of the digestive tract do you absorb most of your nutrition? From the esophagus, the stomach, the intestines, or the E. coli? That's Hawaiian for your rectum.
We didn't realize we're going to have so many people from outside Hawaii on this webinar.
Yeah, so if we put terms up there you don't understand, chat us and let us know. But if you can let us know what you think the answer to that question is, that'd be great. And then Anissa will post the results from your participation, and we'll just comment on that a little. Okay. Very good. You guys know a lot. That helps, because that was one of the things. 84% of you decided the answer was the intestines. Nobody went for the E. coli. The E. coli has a different function. But yeah.
Intestines is the correct answer.
Thank you, Anissa. You can close that. And then we've got one more poll question at this part in the presentation. So,
what is the primary role of your stomach in the digestive process? Does it make acids and enzymes for mixing and grinding of food? Is it to growl when you are hungry? Is it to absorb nutrients, hormones, and bile, or none of the above?
Here's your answer, and Anissa will post the polling of your answers. Okay, so once again, yes, you guys do have a good knowledge base, 88% of you. And that is exactly what the stomach does in the digestive process, is it makes acids and enzymes for mixing and grinding the food. If there is any absorption that goes on in the stomach, it's not significant. As you go into the small intestine and then into the large intestine, that's where most of the absorption comes. And so what I did was, because we didn't know what you guys' background was going to be, I wanted to make sure that you knew what I was talking about and you had a picture of what that digestive tract or the GI system looks like. So it starts in the mouth. There's salivary glands there that help with the initial digestion, initial enzymes, goes down the food tube or the esophagus, goes into the stomach, and the liver and gallbladder are there, and then also part of that whole area is also the pancreas. It goes through the stomach and then goes into the small intestine, and the small intestine is all that folded up stuff that's kind of the pinkish right in the middle. And then you have, that's the small intestines, and the small intestines, I think I read that if you stretch them out, it can be like 30, 34 feet long. In meters, for you guys that are joining us from those countries that use meters, it's about 10.34 or something like that, if I remember correctly. And then there's also the large colon, and it has kind of three parts to it: the ascending, transverse, as it goes across the trunk of the body, and then the descending. And then it goes to the rectum or the colon. And in the large intestine, that's where most of the absorption and the microbial or the bacteria in your gut microbiome do their work. So one of the questions that we have is, what is the gut microbiome? So it's trillions of bacteria, and they live together in an ecological community, and they live symbiotically on our skin, in our mouth. You remember what you saw in the YouTube video earlier. We've got a number of different places, and most importantly though, in our gut. In the literature now, or the scientists, you quite often refer to our gut microbiome as the second brain. It weighs about 3 to 4 pounds and about the same size or weight as our brain. So interestingly, 90% of the cells in your body are non-human. And the way the scientists found this out, when they did the Human Genome Project a couple of years ago, they were looking at what is all the different gene typing in the human body. And they came up with approximately 23,000 gene types from cells in the human body. But then they realized, after they did that, they realized they'd missed a really important source of gene types that are in our body, but they're not human. And these are the bacterial genes that are in our gut microbiome. And there's approximately 20 million of those. So it's like approximately 1,000 times more than what we have in human genes. And once again, scientists figure that our gut is the second brain.
Yeah, so I think scientists now are actually looking at the genes in the bacteria because they're realizing how much influence they have on us. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of amazing that there's just so many of them, so many more bacterial genes than human genes.
Very important. So, once again, yes, they're important. They help the gut microbiome to communicate with the brain, and they do things like regulate mood, stress response, immune response, digestive function. They are influencing your weight and more. Science is finding out lots more. So what we know is what we put in our bodies, what we eat, our nutritional intake affects the microbiome, which in turn affects our mind and other crucial body systems. So kind of the takeaway is if your microbiome is in balance, then you're probably going to be feeling pretty good. You're probably going to be up there a little bit farther towards the purple zone on the mental wellness continuum. And if you're out of balance, you're going to have problems with fatigue, feeling sad, feeling tense, probably feeling kind of heavy, or your tummy is bloated. You might be having some confusion or some brain fogs. You might be having some stiffness and soreness from inflammation. The microbiome plays an important role in the way you feel mentally and physically. So that brings me to this slide in the literature, there's a lot of information on animal studies. So the one that I wanted to show you first is the mice studies on obese mice. And what they did was they took a sample of the obese mouses, and they could just tell by the size, but a sample of the obese mouse's gut microbiome, probably fecal matter, and they put it into a germ-free mouse that was pretty lean. And lo and behold, over time, this lean mouse became obese and started doing the same type of eating behaviors as the mouse that it got the gene transplant from. So this is involved with what we're going to kind of explain to you today, the gut-brain axis. And once again, you remember we call now in the literature, you're going to see a lot of information about the gut microbiome being called the second brain, and it communicates with the first brain that's up in your head. In this day and age, this is new science, you guys. In this day and age, you cannot separate the two. Everything that happens in your body all works together. You can't separate your mental health from your physical health. This gut-brain axis, or we call it GBX, is a network, and it consists of the nerves, which you can think of as wires. There's neurotransmitters, like I talked about before, the serotonin. 95% of the serotonin that we have in our bodies is produced in our gut, and that needs to get up to the brain through this network. Also, hormones are involved. These are chemicals in your body. And then there's also the cells of your immune system. So when you put it all together, you see the little graphic there has a bidirectional arrow from the gut microbiome up to the brain. So we say that the gut-brain axis, or GBX, connects our nervous system, which is the brain, to our gastrointestinal system, which is the gut. And then the third part of the axis is then it also keeps the immune system intact and hopefully functioning and able to respond if there's a problem with any pathogens. So vast array of chemical and biochemical messengers throughout the entire body, which include the microbiome, bacteria, the hormones, cytokines, neurotransmitters, and these are all things that come from the microbiome. So I also wanted to make sure that you guys understood some of the terms that we're using, and central nervous system talks about it's the brain and the spinal cord, and a part of the central nervous system is the autonomic nervous system. It has two parts, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system comes into play when maybe you're dealing with something that frightened you, or something that is kind of putting you in some stress, and you can have like a fight or flight reaction. And then the parasympathetic system actually counteracts that and kind of helps to calm you down. So the two of those work together and they're part of the central nervous system. But now what the scientists are also finding is there's another nervous system that works within the body. It's called the enteric nervous system, or the ENS. which is a mesh-like network of neurons or nerve cells that are embedded in the wall of the gastrointestinal tract. And this is huge. This is why the second brain, the gut microbiome, weighs about the same as what the first brain does. And once again, the enteric nervous system is responsible for creating and moving the neurotransmitters that are produced by the gut microbiome, make sure that they get to the right places in the body. Now, one of the ways that this happens with the enteric nervous system is it communicates through a central nervous system nerve called the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is very important in our body. It carries an extensive range of signals that can be produced from the gut microbiome, from the enteric nervous system and other organs to the brain, and it's bidirectional, so it goes back and forth. That's where the second brain label comes in, because of the enteric nervous system.
Yeah, and what I thought was kind of interesting that you were telling me earlier is that if they cut the vagus nerve, the enteric nervous system is still having an impact on the brain, even without the vagus nerve. Is that right?
Carry the messages. You know, the body has all sorts of ways of, if there's a problem, getting around it. We found that out with a lot of the brain research that was done, and we realized that there was neuroplasticity in the brain. It wasn't just a matter of you got damage to a part of the brain and then that part of the brain was gone. The body would figure out different ways to get around it. So that's kind of what happens with the vagus nerve too. But the vagus nerve is very important. And one of the big parts is that it communicates from the enteric nervous system to the brain and the rest of the body. So we liked this picture and we thought we'd share it with you. Your gut is the theater in which the drama of your emotions plays out. And those of you that are here with us in Hawaii, you'll recognize that as the theater, the Hawaii theater. So we thought
we just feel like the gut needs to have a special audience today. So, but it's actually more than that too, right? It's how you think can actually impact your gut. I'll let you go on and explain that.
So this slide, it talks about, it goes both ways. The brain can affect the gut and the gut can affect the brain. And then it just lists all kinds of different ways that this happens. You know, have you ever had that feeling when you got nervous or you were a little bit, maybe you thought you were in love and you would see the person that you had this romantic ideas about and you would get butterflies in your stomach. Or maybe you were feeling fearful or really sad, something really tragic happened. And then you kind of described it, oh, it makes me feel sick to my stomach. Acute stress can work on our appetite in the short term, but over the long term, you can end up with, if you've got chronic stress, you can end up with cravings for food. It's kind of like cravings for carbs, or you can end up with increased appetite that gets kind of out of control. So one of the ways that the gut can affect the brain is the food that we eat. The bacteria in the gut releases receptors that also work with enzymes to aid digestion. And then of course, going back to that microbiome bacteria, it sends signals to the brain via the enteric nervous system, the vagus nerve, and then it also activates hormones. And hormones like leptin and ghrelin, and we'll talk a little bit about those later on, to induce hunger or satiety, which is you feel full, you don't want to eat anymore. And as I talked about earlier, this slide talks about 60 to 90% of the neurotransmitters involved in mental wellness, but I saw a lot of literature that said 95% of our serotonin is our happy neurotransmitter is produced in the gut. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It works in the brain, and there's some production of that in the gut also. Helps with your executive functioning in the cortex part of the brain. So back to the mouse studies. So then what the scientists started finding out, because we're telling you guys, the gut microbiome also affects your mental health. So they found these mice that were kind of timid and introverted. And these scientists work with mice all the time, so I guess they get to know their behaviors really well. So what they did was they took the microbiome, once again, probably a fecal matter transplant, and they put it into a mouse that they determined had kind of behavioral characteristics of being extroverted and like happy all the time. And, you know, maybe it was socializing a lot with the other mice, but it was a germ-free mouse. So when they transplanted the gut microbiome into the extrovert mouse, then after a period of time, lo and behold, this extroverted mouse started displaying introverted type of behaviors similar to what they were seeing in the mouse that it got its microbiome transplant from.
Yeah. You know, I've heard even in fecal matter transplants in humans, you know, that sometimes the recipient can start to take on some of the personality traits of the donor.
Yeah, in some of the literature, research literature that I looked at, they did talk about they were taking human fecal matter transplants and they were putting it into mice. The literature is full of a lot of the studies that has been done were on animals and mainly mice or lab rats. But when they took the microbial transplant and put it into mice, then the mice's behavior or eating habits changed, and they started taking on some of the characteristics of the person that they had gotten the transplant from too. A lot of the literature goes back to what the scientists saw in the animal studies. So why care about the gut-brain axis? Well, as you saw in the video and as we've already been talking about, it's an immune system primer. Make sure the immune system is there, ready to start functioning if need be. It's a neurotransmitter function. It works with hormone regulation. It also has benefits to the body, as in metabolism of some of the products that the gut microbiome comes up with. So one of the things that I bolded it on this side is the scientists are saying, yes, there is a probable cause to particular kinds of disease states, and having a rich and diverse gut microbiome results in optimal health. So I wanted to put this up, part of it to make sure that you understood what we were talking about. Eubiosis is a good gut microbiome. And this is a picture of a gut microbiome it's a nice looking gut microbiome. It's got the epithelial layer. The epithelial layer is a one layer lining of cells. It starts all the way up in your mouth, goes all the way through your stomach, your intestines, to your rectum. And you've got all these epithelial cells. And they're all sitting there. They've got little villi, kind of just can see that on the slide, sticking up from them. That helps with the motility of what's in the gut, moves it along. There's also a mucosal layer. And then on the bottom of the slide is labeled the gut immune system, but that's where the blood supply is, and that's where anything that you're taking into your gut, it gets metabolized, it goes into your blood system. So nice looking gut. It's a eubiosis type of gut microbiome. Then we get into the situation where there's problems, and one of the big problems is leaky gut syndrome. And you can have all sorts of things that happen that cause leaky gut syndrome. Big one is stress. Maybe there's some genetic predisposition, but what ends up happening is you see on the right under leaky gut syndrome, you see microorganisms, undigested food, there's all sorts of little things up there. And the first three epithelial cells, first 3.5 epithelial cells, the junctions are tight. But then you get to the next one and there's some, what we call permeability, or the junctions aren't tight. And what happens is there's leakage through those junctions. And there's stuff that gets into the bloodstream, which is what's on the bottom of the epithelial cells. And that's where you get the immune system, depending upon what is leaking into the bloodstream, that's where you get the immune system jumping into action. You can have, it can result in things like a breach of the blood-brain barrier. And once again, it's that gut-brain axis. And what actually happens is there's permeability of the gut-brain barrier. And the way it's labeled, you can tell. You want it to be selective as to what gets into the brain. You can also end up with food intolerances or allergies. You can end up with autoimmune type of disorders and inflammation. Or, yeah, you can end up with problems with nutrient deficiency from malabsorption of food particles also.
So we have a really good video on this. And before we share it with you, I did want you to know that some people are asking questions and I'm writing them down here, and we will be addressing them at the end of the presentation. So we're not ignoring you. We will get to your questions.
We're going to talk a little bit about those three boxes that are on the bottom that talk about it, because what I did was looked at the literature and looked at these disorders that are listed and the syndromes that are listed there. What does the literature have to say about that? So we have another video, if Anissa can put it up for us, on leaky gut.
Oops.
Our intestines are lined with barrier cells, called epithelial cells, that transport nutrients from food into our bloodstream. These epithelial cells have tight junctions between them to ensure that no undigested food particles, digestive waste, or toxins escape into our blood and create health complications. Healthy epithelial cells are supported by a balanced microbiome of good and bad bacteria, which is supported by a nutrient-rich intestinal environment. Stress, poor diet, lack of exercise, and use of antibiotics can disrupt our microbiome and intestinal environment. These disruptions can lead to weak epithelial cells and loose epithelial junctions. Without tight junctions, undigested food particles, digestive waste, and toxins can leak out of our intestines and into our bloodstream, causing inflammatory immune responses, various digestive disorders, and changes to the normal function of the digestive tract. This is often called leaky gut. So what can you do about it? A nutrient-rich intestinal environment helps support a healthy microbiome, which helps support strong epithelial cells and tight epithelial junctions. Therefore, an effective way to help prevent leaky gut is to maintain a healthy, nutrient-rich intestinal environment. This can be achieved with whole food and plant-based nutritional intake, good eating habits, and lifestyle management techniques like stress reduction and exercise.
Okay, thank you, Anissa. We kind of cut that off because the last part of it just talks about things that you can do, and we're going to cover that in our presentation. So, wanted to talk a little bit about, once again, just reinforcing what you saw in the video. You got leaky gut, you're going to have dysbiosis, which is a gut that's out of balance. Okay, your gut microbiome's not doing so well, and you might have infections in your gut. It could be bacteria, parasitic, fungal. You probably are going to get some inflammation in your gut when you got leaky gut, and you saw it in the pictures and in the video. Those little epithelial cells get inflamed, and that's part of why you get disrupted junctions between the epithelial cells. Stress can be a factor in that. Your diet can be a factor in that. Drugs, different types of antibiotics, and they'll wipe out your flora and fauna or your gut microbiome, and so that can be a factor in leaky gut developing. Proton pump inhibitors like things like You can buy these over the counter now. You don't actually need prescriptions. Zantac, which is ranitidine, omeprazole, which is Prilosec, and then there's another one called Nexium, which is omeprazole. And then also NSAIDs. And NSAIDs are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And things like ibuprofen, Aleve, naproxen, any of those kind of things that you can buy those over the counter too. You don't need a prescription for it, and usually people take those for pain or inflammation. And then also, as you saw in the first video, age can also be a factor in problems with the gut microbiome leading to leaky gut. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about further implications of leaky gut. So in the Honolulu Star Advertiser, just this middle of this month, July 14th, 2020, there was, in the health section of the paper, there was an article entitled Inflammatory Bowel Tied to Greater Dementia Risk. Once again, speaking to that gut-brain axis. So if anyone's interested and they want to go back to the Honolulu Star Advertiser, just look for July 14th. So that leads me to the slide where I talk about some of the gastrointestinal type of disorders that definitely the literature shows that's involved in gut disruption, a dysbiosis of the gut microbiome. You can have inflammatory bowel syndrome or inflammatory bowel disease. They're kind of, one's more acute, one's less acute, but it's chronic. With IBS, you can end up with having abdominal pain. You can end up with having either bouts of diarrhea every time you eat, or you go the other end of the spectrum, you have constipation. And then if it goes on for a long period of time, you can end up with the IBD, which things like some people have Crohn's disease. They also put that into this category also. Then there's the type of colitis or the gut problems that you can have caused by Clostridium difficile, which is a pathogenic bacteria that can end up populating your gut and taking over your gut microbiome. And it's especially associated with antibiotics. If you've taken high doses of antibiotics for a long period of time, there's a good chance that then what you're going to end up with in your gut is Clostridium difficile. Physicians will say, oh, you're having a diarrhea side effect to the antibiotics, but it's actually more than that. They have found that using probiotics and also fecal matter transplant, you guys, and we go back to that idea from the mice studies that fecal matter transplants can also make a difference. But for those of you who may not be familiar with it, the World Health Organization defines probiotics as live microorganisms which, with adequate administration, confers post-health benefit. Can't tell you the number of doctors where if you came in with the antibiotic side effect of diarrhea, they would say, eat yogurt. Or if you're taking a course of antibiotics, they'd say, make sure that you also take in between the doses of antibiotics. Smart doctors would tell you this, but make sure that the yogurt has live bacterial cultures or live lactobacillus colonies in the yogurt. And they'll say, look for that specifically on the label. So when antibiotics are used in similar types of GI diseases, and scientists are starting to learn that there's other types of GI diseases where they're also starting to think, we think this is connected to the gut, a dysbiotic gut. So when you use the antibiotics with GI diseases, you get a suppression in the growth and binding of pathogenic bacteria like Clostridium. The
Claire,
barrier function of
Claire, not to interrupt you, but is your screen supposed to be shared?
Yeah, you're not seeing it?
Yeah, a lot of people are wondering about that. Yeah, so if you could share, sorry. I just didn't want you to get so lost in it. And
yeah, that would be a problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hold on a second. Let's get it back up for you. Sorry. Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Sorry, thank you for letting us know. Okay, so here. Show current. Here we go. Okay. There we go. Sorry about that.
Okay, it's back on.
Yep,
Do you
we
see
can see it.
Okay, great. Sorry.
Sorry, you guys. Okay, well, now you've got the slide where I talked about what's on the blue side, the gastrointestinal type of diseases that you can end up with from a dysbiotic microbiome. What I was just talking about was the benefits of probiotic use in these diseases and other gastrointestinal type of diseases. Helps to get rid of the pathogenic bacteria like the Clostridium. Also works on those epithelial cell junctions and the barrier that presents. The epithelial mucosa then also, it secretes these short chain fatty acids, very important metabolic type of product of the gut microbiome. An example of that is butyric acid. And it's the microbiome that produce this. I don't believe that you can supplement to have these short chain fatty acids. Besides, they probably just get broken down in the stomach anyway. But then you can also end up with variations on the immune activity of your body. And normally, unless you've got bad stuff, bad bacteria getting into the bloodstream, you want your immune system to kind of just stay calm. If the immune system starts getting activated, you can end up with possibly autoimmune disorders. So before I go into that, I want to just show you a graphic of a healthy a healthy gut microbiome on the left and an unhealthy gut microbiome on the right. Probably some of you with inflammatory bowel disorder. So on the right side, I'll just describe this a little bit. You have the epithelial cells, and you see them. They've got the little villi on top, and then they've got the blue is the inside of the intestine, and there's all these things that are floating around in there. Some bacteria, the ones that are a little hairy. There's some food particles in there. There's some other stuff in there. Some of the epithelial cells are specialized. And one of the important ones is the goblet cells, and they release this substance that helps with the mucosal barrier that develops inside of your intestine. But then on the other side of the intestine, the blood supply side, you have these dendritic cells. And what they kind of do, graphically, who knows how it actually looks, they have kind of a little extension that's kind of favoring or tasting what's going on in the gut intestine. And then they also are influential in activating the immune system or keeping it calm. And you see the T cell, the B cell, the Treg cell. The Treg cell part of the immune system is kind of what keeps the immune system. It's there, it's ready to react, but it's just staying calm because everything's copacetic. It's a good microbiome. The T cells and the B cells, if you look on the side of the slide where it's IBD, that's what's been activated, because look at what's going on between those epithelial cells. They're not doing
like a good fortress at all.
The mucus is migrating, the bacteria is migrating into the bloodstream, the food particles are migrating into the bloodstream, the body recognizes that it's not good. The immune system gets activated, there's macrophages that come up, they work in conjunction with the T and the B cells, and you end up with an inflammatory state in the gut and in the body. So then kind of so that brings us to, I call it metabolic conditions, where if you've got a dysbiotic gut going on, you can maybe be having problems with being overweight. The research has found that the gut microbiome is involved in being overweight, being really overweight, which is obese. It's also involved in gut cancers. The next bullet talks about insulin-resistant metabolic syndrome, dyslipidemia, type 2 diabetes. That's kind of a progression of states that can happen in your body. The insulin resistance, your pancreas is producing some insulin, but your cells in your body are just not quite as sensitive to the insulin. You're not getting enough of it in your body for the glucose or the energy in your bloodstream to be able to get into your cells where it's energy. You can start having changes in your metabolism in your body, and we start to call that metabolic syndrome. We know that if it doesn't change, if you continue with the high lipids and fats in your bloodstream and your body's not using them the way it normally should be, you can eventually end up in type 2 diabetes, where you're having to take medications or insulin to help assist the body with getting the energy into the cells. Now, what I saw when I looked at the literature is that we know, the scientists know now, that paying attention to your gut microbiome, having a rich and diverse gut microbiome, can affect these kind of diseases or situations, conditions. We even know of some people that through working on their gut microbiome to get a rich and diverse gut microbiome, they've actually gotten to the point they brought their, and it's a lab test called hemoglobin A1C, and it's a lab test that tells what is the amount of glucose that's remaining in the bloodstream over a period of time. And normally you want it to be in the lower numbers. If I have someone come in and I check their hemoglobin A1C and it's like in 13, I go, hey, you've got some work to do. If they work on it and get their gut microbiome rich and diverse, they can bring their hemoglobin A1C down to normal levels, and they can get off the medication. The gut microbiome is really important. Same thing in what we're starting to find out is in cardiovascular disease. We're starting to feel like there's a real implication. Actually, it's kind of a fourth part of that gut-brain axis, the immune system and the heart. And when we're starting to learn that you take care of your gut microbiome, your heart is going to work well too. You're not going to end up with cardiovascular disease. And I'll talk some more about that in relation to the brain and cardiovascular disease later on. In alcoholic and non-alcoholic, but most important, fatty liver disease, we're also starting, and the people that work with the medical specialists that work with people that are dealing with these kind of conditions, liver cirrhosis, liver cancer, mainly the literature talks about, and they figured it out a long time ago, like 5-6 years ago, that if they're dealing with a rich and diverse gut microbiome, when they do liver transplants, people do better with the liver transplant. You know, one of the things about liver transplant is your body can reject it, also saying, oh, this doesn't look right, this shouldn't be here. But if you think back to, remember, the gut microbiome also works with the immune system. If the gut microbiome isn't rich and diverse and it's sending that signal about inflammation and saying it's not the right thing, then yeah, you're probably going to have problems with rejection. So yeah, we do know the literature reflects that in these instances, having a rich and diverse gut microbiome helps. So yeah, you can resolve some of these conditions with getting back to that good gut microbiome. Then there's also autoimmune conditions. Now I need to preface this by saying that you can have a genetic predisposition, and you might have this in your gene makeup and never end up with any of these conditions. Or you may have this in your gene makeup and something triggers those genes, and then you end up with lupus. And once again, it goes back to we're starting to think it goes back to the gut microbiome. Same thing with type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is different from type 2 diabetes because it's actually a matter of your body thinks the pancreas is bad, and it starts attacking the cells. It destroys these little insulin secreting pancreatic delta cells, and then you end up, you don't have any insulin. And it used to be that we would see this in kids, and they, as they grew, they were not thriving, and usually they would just pass away. That was before the development of insulin. But now we're learning that it can happen at any time in the lifespan. You can end up being a type 1 diabetic, but we're also learning it's very involved with the gut microbiome. Rheumatoid arthritis, the same thing. Remember we said that if the immune system gets activated, you can end up with inflammation, not only of the gut, but you can end up with joint inflammation. It can affect the cartilage. If the cartilage is destroyed, you can end up with erosion because the bones are working right on top of each other. It can also extend to the lung, the hearts, and the kidneys. So once again, a gut that's not looking so good, that's dysbiotic. Your bacterial function is not so good. You don't have enough of the different kinds of bacteria you should have in there. Your epithelial cell barrier function is not so good. You can end up with inflammation, and then you can end up with the immune system overreacting, the dysregulation. So once again, probiotics can help with the mucus secretion in the gut, the production of the peptides or the short chain fatty acids like butyric acid, the maintenance of the epithelial cell barrier function. They can ensure that the gut microbia, the bacteria, and the mucosal immune cells are communicating adequately. And they can help with the host's immune system response to pathogenic or bad bacteria. And then kind of the last area that I wanted to talk about, well, actually there's two, but this one I called it brain pathology. If you got a gut that's not doing so good, it can lead to the permeability of that blood-brain barrier layer. And that can result in neuroinflammatory and neurodegenerative conditions. One that you probably all heard a lot about is Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease is a type of dementia. There's other types of dementia, Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia. But the reason why I put Alzheimer's up here is because in the literature, it used to be that scientists felt like there was these amyloid protein plaques that developed in the brain, and they became very entangled, caused problems, disruptions in the neurons of the nervous system, and ended up with people having problems with their thinking, with their behavioral and social skills, and it just progressively got worse and worse. Well, it didn't really explain why they found some people that didn't have these behavioral or social manifestations of thinking problems, and they found they also had these amyloid plaque entanglements. So in looking for a better answer as to what is involved in Alzheimer's disease, they started looking at the gut microbiome because, you know, the gut and the brain, they're on this axis, and lo and behold, they started figuring out, no, there is some problems with the neuroinflammation and the blood-brain barrier permeability, and gradually the degenerative type of condition. So now that's what the literature thinks is involved in Alzheimer's disease, and also Parkinson's disease. I was fascinated by this. I hadn't really heard of this type of stuff before. Parkinson's disease, you may have this real fine tremor, sometimes you have it in your chin, but it's once again a neurodegenerative kind of chronic condition resulting from that blood-brain barrier permeability. And ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or it's also known by Lou Gehrig disease. You can end up with a gradual degenerative process where you've got a brain inside a body that doesn't respond to the nervous signals. It's not a good condition you want to end up with. You might have it in your genetic makeup. I'll go back again to that trigger. Possibly maybe you got it in your genetic makeup. Maybe you had a father and an uncle that had this disease. You kept your gut microbiome good all through your life. You handled stress. You weren't doing drugs. You didn't have environmental toxins that you were dealing with. You never got ALS. Okay. Remember, you can have the genetic makeup for it. It might never get triggered. MS, it's another inflammation of the central nervous system where the lining of the neurons, the myelin proteins that line those neurons start to get degraded, and the nervous messages don't go back and forth so well. Then there's also autism spectrum disorder, and I listed it as in that way, ASD. And the best way for me is just to read this. Refers to a broad range of conditions characterized by challenges with social skills, repetitive behavior, speech, and nonverbal communication. And I put it as a spectrum disorder because autism is not a single disorder, but it manifests in various different ways. There's also a number of other disorders that are closely related, and they share the symptoms also.
Just from a layperson perspective, just to make sure we're connecting all the dots here, so correct me if I'm wrong, okay? But it sounds like if you get gut dysbiosis, which is, too many bad bacteria and toxins, and you've got a bad gut microbiome, that can lead to leaky gut. And when you have leaky gut, then those toxins and bad pathogens can get into your systemic circulation.
And your immune system gets activated.
Right, your immune system gets activated. And then that inflammation can actually compromise your blood-brain barrier. So you almost have like leaky brain, just like leaky gut. And then you can get neuroinflammation and just generally bad signaling and whatever genetic predisposition you have.
We know a number of people who have children that have been given the diagnosis of autism. And when they work on their diet and their gut microbiome, the behavioral problems that the kids have gets better. Same thing for ADHD, which I'll talk about in just a second here. So there's also thought now, and scientists are looking at it, having to do with the gut microbiome in mental health disorders. We definitely know in depression and anxiety and stress type of disorders that gut microbiome is very influential in that. 95% of the serotonin is produced in the gut. But then we also have things like ADHD, adult attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And there's some information in the literature where working on the diet and on the gut microbiome, there's improvements in that. The psychiatric disorders of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, I saw some mention of it in the literature, but not so much evidence. It needs more research. Bipolar disorder, because bipolar disorder has a manic stage and a depressive stage. It's like two opposites on the spectrum. But that depressive stage, more often than they might benefit by working on their gut microbiome. So one of the things I want to point out, we talked a little bit about the different types of neurotransmitters. There's a neurotransmitter called glutamate, which you'll see how that's spelled in just a little bit on another slide. It's a neurotransmitter that is an excitatory neurotransmitter, so it's probably involved in anxiety and stress. GABA, which is listed here, is kind of the opposite end of glutamate. It's a neurotransmitter that kind of is a calming neurotransmitter. So I like to call GABA as puts on the brakes to glutamine. But yeah, a lot of these neurotransmitters are involved with the gut microbiome. And one of the big things is you got to have that gut-brain axis communicating adequately. Now, the other thing I wanted to just note, and on the bottom of that slide, I talk about the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, HPA. It's a bidirectional communication system, and it works with hormones and chemicals, because the hypothalamus, pituitary, and the adrenal are all glands that secrete hormones. It's also involved in the physiological reaction to stress, the regulation of body functions, digestion, emotion, and that. So also involved in this, so it's kind of another part to complicate the whole picture. The HPA axis, we think is because the gut microbiome can work with hormone regulation, that it also works with that HPA axis, but it's one of those areas where it needs more research. So I wanted to put up this little graphic, and I'll just point out some things for you on this. If you look at it, it's a little section of the gut, and on the top part of the box, there's healthy microbia, and they secrete all these little things, microbia-derived mediators, which are down in the very right-hand bottom of the box, and they kind of color-coded them. And then on the bottom is the dysbiotic microbia, and it kind of just shows there's one arrow that points to the bottom part of the brain, the CNS that's in there, and it's green, it's neurodegeneration, and then the top is neuroprotective. Now, a couple things I'll just point out to you. The dopamine, which is kind of green, it's a green circle with a white middle. If you look on that section of the slide on the top with the healthy microbia, you see there's a fair number of those little molecules that are coming off of the healthy microbia. In the bottom, if you go down, there's like only 3 of them. And you see where that system, the unhealthy microbia, they're kind of, when it goes through that gut-brain axis, you're ending up with some neurodegeneration or neuroinflammation. And the naive CD4 T cell, and then you see once again the Treg cell and the T17 and the T1, those are all part of the immune system. And then there's these other microbia-derived mediators that are also produced in the gut. So you can see where if your gut microbia is rich and diverse, it's a neuroprotective type of situation. If not, you can end up with neuroinflammation, neurodegeneration. That makes sense? Okay.
Yeah, so just to tell you a little bit about my personal, oh yeah, let's go back up one. Oh, okay, that's all right. Oh, too bad. Okay, we lost, there it is.
Oh,
we got it backwards. Okay, so just tell you a little bit about my personal story with gut health. This is a picture of my family and I on the North Shore, probably about 15 years ago. And you know, we look like a really happy family having a wonderful day. It looks like something you would see on Facebook. But actually, Facebook is really more like fake book. And honestly, this was a really, really, really challenging time in my life. So my husband, who is holding my older son, that son was extremely low energy, which is probably why my husband was holding him. He had no joie de vivre. He was just very, very happy being on the couch. And he just didn't seem to have very much interest in life. And then I was holding my younger son, who was like a whirling dervish. He was bouncing off the walls. And I don't know which one was harder, you know, having one that was just sitting still and not engaging, or one that was over engaging. Ultimately, the older one got diagnosed with inattentive ADD, and the younger one got diagnosed with ADHD, with hyperactivity. So I thought that being a parent was the most important role I ever had. And so I quit a job I loved to really focus on my kids. And I worked in lockstep with my pediatrician, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a neurologist. And, you know, we did everything that they told us to do, and sometimes layered medication on top of medication. And you know, my kids were surviving, but they certainly weren't thriving. And as a mother, we know the difference, and we want to go to thrive. So I ended up packing my kids up and taking them to Southern California to do brain SPECT scans because I wanted to know what was going on inside their brain. And the most interesting outcome that happened from that incident was not the scan result. It was another fellow who I happened to meet in the waiting room. And he was a pediatric orthopedic surgeon who had a child with autism. And his kid was getting scanned at the same time my kid was getting scanned. And he told me, you know, Debbie, you're really handling this the wrong way. You're using drugs that are targeting the brain, but you should be working on the gut health. And at that time, I wasn't sure whether this was the answer I was seeking or this guy was like some Looney Tune guy, because yeah, I had never heard this. And how come my doctor had never mentioned this to me? But I really didn't have many more options. So he connected me with the type of physician. Usually they're like a functional medicine doctor, or we call them MAPS doctors, that kind of specialized on a holistic approach to healing and gut health. Naturopaths do the same thing. And really it was transformational, you know, because my kids didn't have any problem pooping. You know, there was no diarrhea or constipation. I didn't think we had GI issues at the time. But you can see that my son was very, very skinny. He wasn't absorbing his nutrients. And actually, you know, he would sometimes kind of hold his heart after a meal, and that was acid reflux, which I didn't know about. And so, you know, in fact, he did. And then my younger son, you can kind of see he's got the Buddha belly. And, you know, that, so those are, and he would also sometimes, you know, lay over a chair after a meal, but I didn't recognize that.
Push the gas out of his belly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway.
They were having GI symptoms.
They were, but I didn't know about it, and nobody asked me about it. In fact, the psychiatrist would say to my son in counseling, it's okay to use your energy, when in fact he didn't really have any. He had a hypothyroid. So anyway, fast forward, you know, on this journey with gut health, and oh, yeah, because they're out of sequence. Back up. There you go. And this story has a really happy ending. You know, my older son ended up, you know, getting through college. He got a degree, would you believe, cognitive science, where he's calling me from school saying, hey, Mom, guess what? My doctor or my professor is talking about gut health and probiotics, and kind of validating everything I was doing. And that was so fulfilling. And he actually is thriving. He's living in China, so he's definitely off the couch. Yeah, he's working and he's off the couch because he's fully engaged in life. And my older son, who was, you know,
younger son.
Sorry, my younger son, who's the real tall one. So, you know,
6'10".
Yeah. So he just has really great emotional regulation. In fact, I think he's got better emotional regulation than I do, and I no longer have to worry about his behavior problems.
Okay, so in this time and age, we also need to talk about COVID-19, and you all probably have heard, or you're all probably concerned about what can you do to make sure your immune system is good, ready to respond to a possible COVID-19 contagious infection that you might be dealing with. You want to make sure that you're not in an inflammatory state, because then you're not going to respond as well to COVID-19. So we just posted a couple of articles that we found on the web. But there's one other thing. Now, you remember from the video earlier, the first video, they talked about the microbiome that you have over your whole body, your skin, your gut, and your oral microbiome. And what the scientists are now starting to find is that the gut microbiome can negatively, this oral microbiome can negatively seed the GI tract. You can also end up with problems within your mouth if you're not working on your hygiene of your oral microbiome. You can end up with periodontitis or dental disease. You can end up with gingivitis, where you're getting an overgrowth of the gum tissue around your teeth. You can have problems with your salivary gland, you can have problems with dental decay, and none of us want that.
Yeah, and I guess this is kind of personal to me too, because, you know, at the time when my son was having gut issues, he was also having dental issues, right? And so, you know, the dentist was giving us lectures about dental hygiene. And so we actually just went and worked on his gut. And then we went back and the dentist was like, oh, great job on your dental hygiene. And really, my son had not changed his dental hygiene at all. We had just worked on his gut.
You see in this next graphic, on the left-hand side is probably some gingivitis, some inflammation going on around the root of the tooth. And on the right-hand side, it's actually the root has died. And so you can end up with then problems seeding into the rest of the body that are indications of inflammation and degradation. And yeah, it does seed the gut microbiome too when you got poor dental hygiene. Okay, so
finally, we've gotten to what can you do? You've heard about, you know, the problem and the opportunity. So now we're getting to what can you do to optimize your gut microbiome. And of course, the first thing we're going to talk about is probiotics.
yeah, all sorts of different kinds of probiotics. And once again, that definition from the World Health Organization, live microorganism, which when taken in adequate dosages confer a health benefit for the host. On to the next one. So of course, like I've been telling you all along, what the scientists are finding is additional research is needed. But we do know that if you've got a rich and diverse gut microbiome, a desirable community of organisms, you'll end up with tight epithelial cell junctions, and you're not going to have that permeability. You're going to have good production of the mucus lining in the gut. You're going to have production of the short-chain fatty acids, which are very important. And then you're also going to have your immune system ready to react to stuff that it needs to react to, but it's also not activated all the time, causing inflammation.
So the caveats are this really is still a new science. The science is still figuring it out. I personally believe that designer probiotics will be the future of medicine, but we're not there yet. There's only a few dozen human trials, and these strains need to be delivered in the right amounts to be effective, and more is not always better. When you go to the health food store and it's got 10 gazillion strains of a culture, it doesn't mean that's the one that you should be buying.
Yeah, and once again, we'll disclaim, we're not experts. We're just giving you more information about this new science. And it's really important that you research if you've got things that you want help with, and then also work with your primary care provider, your medical providers. So we put this slide up just to show you. Now these are some bacterial strains that gene typing has been done. And if you look at the end of the bacteria name, you see these letters and numbers. And this indicates that gene typing has been done. And these three particular probiotics, we know these bacteria have been looked at. We know exactly how they work. And if you look at it, lowers cortisol exposure. That's part of what happens with that HPA axis, and improves GABA neurotransmission. The gut-brain barrier, or the gut-brain axis is working well. The next one enhances calmness. The gut-brain axis is working well. Improves mood. The serotonin is getting up into the brain the way it should be. We know these particular probiotics that are gene typed according to this. And if you put these into your Google browser on your internet, you will see, you'll come up with this information. So the important takeaway point is that when you decide, okay, maybe I should go check out a probiotic, you know, my diet hasn't been so good, blah, blah, blah. I think I'm having some leaky gut problems. Maybe a probiotic would start me on the right path. As Debbie says, you go to the health food store and there's just a ton of probiotics that are available there, and they've got 11 million colonies and 60,000 cultures, and it goes on. and you're going, God, how do I figure out the right one to buy? A little hint, make sure that on the label, they give the gene type. And you can go back and you can actually search it on the web to find out what's that gene type for. You don't want to go into the health food store if you're having a little problems with diarrhea and it just doesn't seem to be getting better, and you go in and think, oh, maybe a probiotic will work, and so you just grab one off the shelf, and actually the gene typing for the particular bacteria that are in that probiotic work by promoting diarrhea. I mean, you don't want to deal with a situation like that. So it's really important to look for this gene typing information. Do your homework and look for what the particular bacteria gene types do. And once again, if you look down on the bottom, it's not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. It hasn't gone through double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, etc.
But you have the internet.
You do what you want with this information.
And talk to your doctor. Now, you gotta love prebiotics. Prebiotics are like the food for probiotics, right? And prebiotics will feed all your good bacteria. So this is like a no-lose proposition on the prebiotics. And all the foods that are mentioned here are great examples of things you can put in your diet, and you're gonna get prebiotic fiber all the way down to your colon where your bacteria need it. And the benefits of prebiotics are very similar to probiotics.
Yeah, and we won't belabor this because we've talked to you so much about this already.
Yeah.
So this is another prebiotic where there was actually a study, and it's very accepted study. It was done with kids with autism. They used a prebiotic, this hydrolyzed gar gum, and it worked well. And there was improvement in behavior in kids with autism spectrum disorder. This is in this is cited in our reference list later on if anyone's interested in looking more at this.
Yeah, I forgot to ask a question that came in about probiotics, Claire. The listener asked, are probiotic supplements necessary? Can you get it from food?
No, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in our slides when we talk about diet. Rich and diverse microbiome, and we'll talk to you about how you might promote that without not necessarily taking probiotics.
Probiotics, this is kind of a new science.
Yes. So what they're actually finding now is you can pair a prebiotic with a particular type of bacteria. So what is happening is, like the 3 bacteria on the right-hand side of the page, they're gene typed. And so if I were to put in Lactobacillus helveticus R0052 on the internet, I would be able to find out what that particular bacteria with that gene type helps with my gut microbiome and my gut-brain axis. But what we're also seeing is that you can pair the prebiotics with particular kinds of probiotics also. So I think this is another place where this is where the science is going to go, that we're going to see these pairings like this.
There's a synergistic effect when you can put the preferred food source with the bacteria.
Yeah.
All right, time for a poll. Anissa, you're back up. And
the question is, how many times per week do you consume foods with probiotic or prebiotic properties?
So this could be foods or supplements.
Every day, 3 to 5 times per week, 1 to 2 times per week, or never. Some of you might be doing things like, here in Hawaii, we eat a lot of kimchi. Some of you might be eating raw sauerkraut. There's a drink that I prefer, kombucha. So we'll see.
Oh, wow, half the group every day. That's excellent.
57% gets a prebiotic or probiotic in their food every day.
Yeah, and 3 to 5 times a week for many of the other ones. Good job, group. Okay.
So,
diet.
This is where, go for it, Debbie.
Okay, so William, what's the best diet for your microbiome? Scientists are really leaning towards the Mediterranean diet. And the reason why the Mediterranean diet is often preferred is because it's so rich in fruits, vegetables, and fibers. You know, things that are, again, going to make it down to the bottom of your colon and feed your bacteria, help you develop those short chain fatty acids, and make for a healthy gut microbiome.
And if you see on the very top of the pyramid, it says meats and sweets less often. Our Western diet is lots of meats and lots of sweets.
So typically the way, you know, actually I think I'm just going to show you this picture next. The way a plate should look is half your plate should be fruits and vegetables, like a whole hand size. Half of it is fruits and vegetables. When I was growing up, I used to think a vegetable was a garnish. I didn't really think that was like what I should be eating, the majority of what I should be eating, right? And then you definitely want to have some protein, but more of a handful of protein. You know, that should be a smaller portion of your plate, as well as the other small portion of concentrated carbs.
I think that's sweet potatoes. And we know that probably sweet potatoes are better than just regular potatoes because there's more nutrients and fiber in sweet potatoes.
An interesting question here. Are children suffering from autism more likely to get it from mothers who go through C-section deliveries? As I heard from women going to do C-sections, they still take parts of this microbiome and wipe it onto the new baby to start them getting the good bacteria, as well as feeding them their mother's milk. So, can you cut down on autism this way?
That's a good question, and I don't really have an answer, but it could be. I mean, with what you've learned today about the gut microbiome, yeah, I wondered about that myself too. With kids that are born with a C-section, you can seed, essentially what you're talking about is a fecal matter transplant. And possibly, there's all sorts of triggers, there's all sorts of things that we also know can cause autism, okay? You may have the genetic predisposition and something may trigger it also.
It's great that your physician is actually talking about this.
Yeah,
that's really good.
If you've got a kid with autism and the physician isn't, then you better go find another physician. Okay.
And these are just some of the documented benefits of the Mediterranean diet. We only have 10 minutes.
And we've talked about a bunch of these before. So once again, Mediterranean diet, think rich and diverse gut microbiome.
Okay, question. How many times per week do you consume 7 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables? That's per day, not per week. Actually, we want per day. How many times per week do you do 7 to 9 servings?
Every day?
Every day.
3 to 5 times per week, 1 to 2 times per week, or never. And actually 7 to 9 servings per day is now the recommendation from the Food and Drug Administration and the CDC and all those federal agencies that try to tell us how to run our lives.
And let's see how we're doing. Okay.
Pretty good. 75%, 3 to 5 times per week.
That's why they're on this webinar, because they care about their health. They're doing something. That's great. Okay, close that poll up.
Oh, somebody says they never get servings of fruits and vegetables.
Oh, now they will do better.
Good thing that was anonymous, huh?
Yeah. Exercise cannot be understated. So on this clinical trial, what they did was they took a group of depressed patients. And in the first group, they did just exercise alone. And you can see that the results of people who recovered from depression using exercise are very, very high. They're all in the first column over here. And then you look at the number of people who relapsed, it was very, very small. So then in the second group, you have the people who just used medication. And so you had a fair number of people who recovered, but then a high percentage relapsed. And then you look at the people who did both exercise and medication, And they did better than the medication alone people, but then again, they did have some relapse, much more than the exercise people. So, you know, the bottom line is that the pharmaceutical industry could somehow bottle exercise. That would be the leading anti-depression drug on the market.
They probably don't like this study, the pharmaceutical. Okay, a couple of polls. Which one should we do? Poll number 8.
150 minutes of physical exercise per week. Yes or no? Survey says, yeah, pretty good. More yes than no.
67%. That's good.
Okay, but now we got a really tough question. Next poll.
How frequently do you exercise? Every day, 3 to 5 times per week, 1 to 2 times per week, never.
So exercise is a little bit like taking a shower. If you take 7 showers in one day, it's not the same as taking a shower every day.
Let's see what you guys answered. Okay, 3 to 5 times per week, 46%, just about half. Very good.
That's very good.
There's some people that never exercise, and so once again, good thing this is anonymous.
Yep.
Thank
Okay,
you, Anissa.
next. We'll go, okay.
So we want to talk a little bit about sleep. So what we're finding is in the US, and I'll try to just summarize this quickly, is that it used to be that we went from an agricultural type of population to a industrial type of community. And it used to be that people would wake up when the sun came up in the morning, they go to sleep when the sun went down at night. Now what we're seeing is in our industrialized society, approximately 47% of the population gets less than 7 hours of sleep per night. You know, you should be getting, for good health, for a rich and diverse microbiome, you should get 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night.
Yeah, and if your microbiome is not good, that could be impacting why you're not getting such good sleep.
Yeah, so in this next slide, there was a study that was done by the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, and they do this. They usually take a number of people over a period of time, over a number of years, and what they found was if you got less than 7 hours of sleep per night, you had more propensity to have problems with being overweight or obese. If you had less than 5 hours of sleep per night, 73% of the population that they looked at were more likely to be obese as compared to people that slept 7 to 9 hours of sleep per day. And once again, you got that hormone regulation, leptin, the ghrelin, and the cortisol. So then there was another study that we looked at that talked about sleep efficiency and total sleep time was positively associated with good gut microbiome and rich and diverse.
That's getting really deep REM sleep, right?
Mm-hmm. You know, hopefully you sleep for 4 to 5 to 6 hours, and maybe you wake up, maybe you have to go to the bathroom, you go back into bed, and you fall back asleep right away, and then you sleep for another couple of hours, and you get 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. That's good sleep efficiency and quality sleep time. It's important, once again, with that gut-brain axis. It's important for health, mood, and vigor. More research will be coming in this area, you guys. Who knows, they may come up with medications to help improve your sleep that focus on the gut-brain axis.
So let's see how you are sleeping as a community. Can we have that poll? How many of you get less than 5 hours a night? And how many get more or less than 7 hours a night? And how many get more than 7 hours per night? And we're talking about real sleep, not lying in bed. Okay. Okay, great. Wow.
62% gets 7 hours or more of sleep per night. Good.
Excellent.
I think I got 8 hours of sleep last night.
Yeah.
I'm on my game today.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to skip the next poll in the interest of time and go to continue on with our presentation. Stress management. We've talked a lot about stress management, and so things that you can do and really look into are meditation exercises, deep breathing, taking a walk in nature. Nature is really great for stress relief. Yoga.
And these things also benefit having a rich and diverse microbiome. So we also know that if you have good social support, you're going to do better with managing stress. You're not going to fly off the handle so easily.
Claire is good for my microbiome.
Good, yes.
Okay,
So,
so
in summary.
and I know there's some questions we will get them, but let's just summarize this now.
So your gut is your second brain.
It modulates your immune system.
Produces neurotransmitters, modulates your hormone.
And it impacts your overall sense of well-being.
We're giving you some tips.
Yeah. So you want to supplement for gut health or make sure that you're consuming foods that have probiotics in them.
And it's a rich and diverse gut microbiome.
You want to exercise 5 days a week for at least 20 minutes per session.
Keep your stress under control. Seek social support.
And sleep for 7 to 8 hours a night. Okay, so let me, some of the questions that I got, Claire.
Before we go into the questions, we just want to remind you all, there's going to be a survey that's going to pop up on your screen after we finish. If you could just answer that survey, that would be great.
Yeah, and if not, they're going to email it to you afterwards. So anyway, one of the questions was the gut. Okay, how is the gut microbiome flora impacted by colonoscopy prep?
Oh, we heard an interesting story about this. A friend of ours talked about a doctor that she knew that had colonoscopies because he had some kind of, I can't remember what the medical condition was that he was dealing with, but he was having frequent colonoscopies. And every time he did the prep, he was checking his fecal matter to see what the range of microbiome looked like. And after the colonoscopy and doing the prep, his microbiome would be wiped out. So he had to repopulate. And he did this over a period of time. He hasn't published any of the results. This is just anecdotal, but hopefully that answers your question. I suspect.
Well, because I do have gotten a lot of colonoscopies, I did ask Dr. Sean Talbot this question, and he did say that generally the microbiome community that you have, it is damaged by the colonoscopy prep, but it does get restored naturally within 30 days afterwards. So he was kind of encouraging on that question. Also, is there good bacteria outside on your skin?
Yes, and that's even a newer part of this science. And so we don't know a whole lot about that too. But if you think of it, you know, there's things you got to do to maintain your rich and diverse gut microbiome. So there's things that you need to do to make sure that your skin microbiome is maintained also. Otherwise, the epidermal layers, they might be more prone to problems. And as you age also, a lot of people will say, my skin has gotten so much finer, I break my tissues so easily. So yeah, I think there's things that you can do to maintain your dermis too.
So we just want to show you, there's our contact information if you want to email us with additional questions following the webinar, and they are going to be making a copy of this presentation by PDF available to you. It'll include all of our references. You can see Claire is very, very detailed, and she referenced everything.
Some of it is fairly new stuff too. That was one of the things I wanted to look at.
Go back and just say goodbye. Yeah.
So if you have questions, the email addresses are there. The people at the Good Samaritan Center will be sending you out some information also. We'd be more than happy to take any questions on our emails. We'll try to get back to you with answers right away.
Yeah, so thank you very much for participating. I hope you enjoyed it, and to your good health. Malama pono. Aloha.
Nice. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much. And thank you to Samaritan Counseling Center Hawaii, NAMI Hawaii, for putting this on. Anissa, do you want to say anything?
No, just thank you so much. That was awesome. I love you guys. You guys are, and I love that you guys were together for this. Also, I forgot to mention about our walk. It's going to be on October 10th. It'll be virtual and online. You can register at namiwalks.org/Hawaii. And Debbie's on the walk committee with me as well. We have lots of fun things planned. And stay safe out there right now.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Take care, everyone.